Welcome to the Blanco Wellness Podcast. Thank you for being here. Take a breath, settle in, and let's talk today about something that quietly shapes the quality of health, relationships, and daily experience more than most people ever recognize, and that most of us were actively taught not to do. There is a phrase that appears in different forms across many healing traditions. What is not felt is not released. The emotion that is not allowed to complete its movement through the body does not disappear. It is stored in the nervous system, in chronic muscle tension, in the particular quality of exhaustion that rest does not fully address, in the low-grade emotional heaviness that some people carry for years without being able to identify its source. The storing is not a failure of strength. It is a predictable outcome of a particular kind of learning that most people receive very early. That certain emotions are inconvenient, that displaying them is a form of weakness, that keeping going is more admirable than stopping to feel, that the appropriate response to difficulty is to manage it efficiently and move on quickly. These strategies have real utility. The capacity to defer emotional processing in the middle of a crisis, to function under pressure without being overtaken by feeling, to continue showing up for what life requires even when something inside is hurting. These are genuine skills, and they matter. The problem is not that we developed them. The problem is that for most people, the deferral becomes permanent. The emotion is moved to the side, the pace of life ensures it is never returned to, and what was temporarily postponed becomes indefinitely stored. The body, which was always involved in the emotional experience, continues to hold what the mind has decided not to think about. The word emotion contains the Latin root motio, movement. An emotion is, at its most fundamental level, energy that is meant to move. Grief moves through the body as tears, as the particular physical quality of sadness, as the genuine physical release that follows genuine weeping. Anger moves as heat, as tension, as the physical activation of energy that wants expression and release. Fear moves as the nervous system's mobilization, which requires completion, the danger past, the body returning to rest, to genuinely resolve. When these movements are interrupted, when the energy is activated but not allowed to complete its natural arc, what accumulates in the body is not neutral. It is unfinished business held in the tissue, requiring ongoing effort to keep managed and producing the particular chronic tension and depletion of a system that never quite gets to rest. Traditional Chinese medicine described this with considerable precision. Different suppressed emotions settling into different organ systems, disrupting the QI flow through those systems and producing over time the physical symptoms that correspond to that disruption. Ayurveda describes the accumulation of unprocessed emotional experience as one of the primary factors in the development of physical imbalance. Modern trauma research has arrived at very similar conclusions through entirely different methods. The body keeps the score, as Bessel van der Kolk's now famous phrase puts it, describing how unprocessed traumatic experience is stored somatically and how genuine healing requires working with the body's stored response rather than only with the narrative the mind has constructed around it. The fear that prevents emotional processing is usually the fear of being overwhelmed, the sense that if the feeling is allowed in, it will be too large, will never stop, will consume the person who dares to actually feel it. This fear is almost always larger than the reality. Emotions move in waves. They rise, they peak, they recede. The rising is uncomfortable. It is also finite. What prolongs suffering is rarely the emotion itself. It is the resistance to the emotion, the enormous ongoing effort of keeping something at bay that would, if genuinely received, move through and complete itself. People who allow themselves to genuinely cry tend to feel lighter afterward, not heavier. Not because the grief is resolved in a single session, but because something moved, that had been held, and that movement is what healing feels like in progress. There is a quality of courage in genuine emotional honesty that deserves to be named because the culture rarely acknowledges it. The courage to say this hurt me, not as a performance of vulnerability, but as a simple, honest statement of fact. The courage to acknowledge grief without immediately reaching for something to manage it. The courage to sit with anger long enough to understand what it is actually pointing toward, before dismissing it as inappropriate. The courage to admit fear rather than performing confidence that is not genuinely felt. None of this is weakness. It is the opposite, the capacity to be in genuine contact with your own experience rather than at an armored distance from it. That contact, sustained with enough patience and enough gentleness, is where actual healing occurs rather than merely the suspension of symptoms. Emotions are also information, and this may be the most practically useful way to relate to them. They tell you, with considerable accuracy, what matters to you. Because only the things that matter generate the emotional responses they do. They tell you where something needs attention. They tell you where a boundary has been crossed, where something has been lost that deserves acknowledgement, where a fear exists that deserves to be honestly examined. The emotion is not the problem. It is the message, and a message avoided, suppressed, or managed away without being read cannot provide what it arrived to offer. As we close today, I want to leave you with an honest and specific invitation. Is there an emotion you have been carrying, something from recently or from longer ago, that has not been fully felt, not analyzed, not explained, not managed, but actually felt? Today is not a demand to resolve it or to be finished with it. It is simply an invitation to give it a little space, to acknowledge honestly that it is there, that it matters, that whatever it is pointing toward deserves your attention. Sometimes that acknowledgement alone, quiet and private, is the first genuine movement that something has made in a long time. What you allow yourself to feel, you can begin to heal. And sometimes, beginning is everything. Thank you for being here with me today. Until next time, be well.